Speaking of Puzder, he also is opposed to a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is just loaded with common sense because none of us got time for that. We're joined by Michael Highsmith today with the Show Me Institute, showmeinstitute.org. Michael, how are you?
Doing well, Mark, and yourself?
I'm doing well. Good to have you in here. So there's a lot of talk still about people wanting to raise the minimum wage. Hopefully with the changes we've seen in not only in the state of Missouri but in Washington, that conversation is going to trail off because I don't think they have the political capital to do it these days. But there are other alternatives that you guys have looked at. What are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a little bit of background here, there's been a lot of protests even just a couple weeks ago regarding the Fight for 15 minimum wage workers wanting to up the minimum wage so that they can help take care of low-income citizens who need a living wage. It's a noble effort, but if you look at the numbers, there's actually a lot better ways that you can make this happen. The minimum wage is a really inefficient way to take care of this kind of thing. Randomly, generically hiking up the wage to $15 an hour isn't going to help the right people. It's going to help every single person that is a minimum wage earner that gets to keep their job. But those who don't get to keep their jobs have their wage go down to zero. And if you think about it, it's a pretty straightforward argument. When you increase the cost of labor, businesses have to find ways to cut down their labor costs so that they can stay in business.
It seems like economics 101, but you can't convince the left of that. They think that these are just greedy businesses who don't want to pay more when they don't really realize that it's a false representation of what the market will bear. That's my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the alternatives that we were looking at is an earned income tax credit. And so what this is it's a refundable tax credit that would focus in on people who have low income wages as their household. So you look at some of the statistics, and it's actually very troubling. You only have about 13% of people who are minimum wage earners live in low income households. So roughly half of your minimum wage earners are teenagers in wealthy households. You have half of them, their household is 3 times the poverty line threshold. So they're not the kind of people who are in need of a minimum wage increase. So what an earned income tax credit would do is it's a tax credit that you get back, and it would focus in on people who have low income wages, and they're the ones who actually would receive the assistance here.
So it's an option in terms of trying to get more money into the pocket of those individuals who they now see as the ones who would benefit from the minimum wage hike.
Right, exactly.
But it's also a redistribution of wealth, effectively, right? Because higher income people are paying more in taxes into a system and then takes that money and gives it back to people who didn't pay very much into the system, if any at all.
So one thing that's really important to look at here is that how the earned income tax credit differs is it incentivizes work. It incentivizes someone who's a low wage, who's living off of welfare right now, to go out and get a job, the same way the minimum wage would, but it doesn't have the adverse effects of increasing the cost towards a business. And the long run, the rising tide lifts all ships. So if you can get someone to start climbing the economic ladder with this kind of a tax credit, once they're working, eventually in the long run they'll be off of welfare, and overall spending should go down for the state.
I'm going to throw you a curveball here. Did you see that proposal earlier this week by James Baker? He went to the White House and tried to sell them on a carbon tax. So they would tax carbon at every level of production, from the mine on up, and the money would be like they think it would create like $200 or $300 billion in tax revenue, and they would turn around and give that back to every taxpayer in America, about $2,000 or something like that.
No, I haven't seen anything
about
crazy.
That. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Why would you do that? Why would you go to that roundabout way to redistribute wealth? Because that's what that is. I know the earned income tax credit isn't exactly the same thing. But is there a disincentive for those same people if they do start to climb the ladder and make more? They're going to get less of that earned income tax credit, correct?
Yeah, so depending on how many kids you have, what your income is, that's how much you qualify for, so that those families that are most in need are the ones who are able to get the financial assistance. But the long-run goal of this is to wean people off of welfare. And so you can get them, once they start climbing the economic ladder, eventually, as their wage goes up, they need less and less assistance until they're actually producing and they're contributing to society rather than taking a toll on it.
And I think part of the problem is as we moved away from these manufacturing jobs that allowed people to grow into the middle class, you've had people who've moved into minimum wage jobs and just stayed there instead of moving up. Maybe it's a lack of skill. Maybe it's a lack of opportunity within that particular company, whatever it may be. I mean, if you start off at a mobile station pumping gas, I'm not quite sure how high you can rise at that level. What I've tried to argue to people is that minimum wage that's what it is, designed to be entry level, and once your skills go up, your pay is going to go up. And that seems to get lost in this conversation all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big thing you have to look at here is that's what the minimum wage is designed for. It's an entry-level position. You have a lot of people who work the minimum wage jobs it's their first job. It's not someone who's struggling to get by. There's a large percentage of minimum wage workers who are making minimum wage because it's their first job. And if you do hike up that wage artificially, the families who are in need most are actually the ones who could suffer potentially.
Right. So is this EITC, as they call it, this Earned Income Tax Credit, something that is being considered right now, or is it just something either in the state or
it's actually
federally?
there's a federal EITC that's already in place.
Right.
You have 26 other states all have it, and you look at some of these studies that look at the EITC, and they actually the main category of people that the main demographic it targets is single women with children, and you see actually massive employment rates that go up with this. So it seems to be working.
Interesting.
It's not currently in place in Missouri right now.
But that money's got to come from somewhere.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, right. It's got to come out of the general fund or wherever they're going to pay it out of. Very good. Michael Highsmith, the website is showmeinstitute.org. People can go there, read more about the EITC and other similar issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely.